We're standing in a piece of unplowed prairie called 9 Mile Prairie near Lincoln, Nebraska, in eastern Nebraska.
I'm Dave Wadeen. I'm a professor in the School of Natural Resources here at University of Nebraska in Lincoln. Also work with the Center for Grassland Studies.
This was the native ecosystem of eastern Nebraska.
One of the jobs I've had for the last 15 years has been to be the director of 9 Mile Prairie, which is a 235-acre natural prairie remnant that we use for teaching and research and conservation. And so 9 Mile Prairie then is this chunk here, comes around up to here.
This would be corn and soybeans if over the hillside over there wasn't a former nuclear weapons facility. So we're talking, 98% if you want to try to find a number of the tall grass prairie is just gone.
It'd be private farmland that had been plowed if it wasn't taken over as a nuclear air base. You would think this would be classified. These are nuclear bunkers under construction right around 1950. So this has been used for teaching and research and conservation by the University of Nebraska since about 1984.
And so my goal is to contrast two approaches to grassland conservation in Nebraska. One approach, you could say, is where we're preserving and sometimes trying to restore natural prairie. And the other approach is where we're trying to do grassland conservation practices on what I'd call working lands.
Nebraska is 96% privately owned land. That's where the battle is for conservation. The external threat is incompatible development around us. And the internal threat, our biggest internal threat right now, is encroaching woody vegetation.
So that always presents a question. Do you take them out? Do you leave them, their habitat?
What do you do with invasive species that weren't part of the game? Is it appropriate to get the herbicides in there and try to knock out the invasive species before it goes exponential?
I'm Aaron Drury. I'm District Supervisor of Greenways and Conservation Areas for Lincoln Parks and Recreation. We have a lot of invasive species, a lot of different problems as far from an ecology standpoint.
So that hillside over there, which is also unplowed prairie, has been pretty heavily encroached.
Even the eastern red cedar tree technically is a native species, but 50, 60, 70 years ago it was bred by scientists. So basically the modern eastern red cedar that you see everywhere taking over prairies is a man-made kind of Frankenstein tree.
That's not what we're trying to protect. That's not the biodiversity we're trying to protect here.
They took all the most aggressive invasive elements and created a monster basically that was invasive, aggressive, can withstand fire better than the original.
We're using herbicide if we have to in some areas to knock it back.
So we have to use other tools like chemicals, grazing, haying it, mowing it, to knock it back to give a competitive advantage to the native species.
I teach a forestry class on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and I teach a grassland conservation class on Fridays. So I joke that we're planting trees on Tuesday and Thursday, and we're killing trees on Friday.
The legend has it that the Pawnee and the Odo kind of shared this area. The trails that were existing, some of them were allegedly hunting trails through the oak woodland remnants. So there's some oak trees in here that are, 200 years or so old. We know Wilderness Park has been here long before 1857. The millennia between now and the last glaciation, so when the last glacier went away around 20,000 or so years ago, all of that time there has been fire. There's been fire either by lightning or by the first people who came here, and the Native Americans used fire as a tool for everything from clearing up campsites, clearing up crop sites, for hunting.
The frequency of fire that would have maintained this as tall grass prairie 100 years ago, it's like doesn't seem to be doing the job now. It's less and less where we're trying to manage the prairie so it looks like some picture of what it would have looked like in 1850. What we're teaching is that most conservation efforts now involve partnerships with diverse stakeholders. And originally they were going to put this big regional power line on the western edge of 9 Mile Prairie. And then a bunch of environmentalists wanted to fight that. The university wasn't quite sure how to respond. It was the big environmental battle of the year in like 2007. In the end, they didn't put it here. They put it over here. So I was like, I'm not sure that was a victory. But we get some money out of the electric company to cooperate on management. I think a strong theme for me is to partner with all these different types of neighbors, because there is a lot of common ground, even though they have different needs. And then the criticism of restoring prairies and conserving prairies in this fragmented landscape that's highly agricultural or urban. You know, sometimes people will kind of almost try to insult you and say, well, you're not really protecting native prairie, you're just gardening. You know, I've learned to say, what's wrong with gardening? You know, it's like, what's wrong with saying, yeah, it's a little bit management intensive, but there's just a beautiful, unique set of plants and animals that we're supporting, and it's valued by the community, and yeah, we decided to take care of it, keep it. And no, it doesn't have bison running on it, and it's different than it was in 1850, but that's okay. My take-home message, you know, is that I think a lot of people still think, well, if it's managed, it's no longer natural.
If you just walk away and leave this for 10 years with a fence that says natural area, do not touch, it'll be gone.
In the 21st century, a managed natural area is not an oxymoron. And that's the evolution of conservation, right? You can't just put a fence around it, put a sign that says natural prairie, and then just walk away for 20 years. You'll have nothing you want. Spring Creek Prairie probably does a better job where you can stand on a vista and pretend. If you look in a certain direction, that's what it was like prior to European settlement. You know, and we're not wilderness, right? But that doesn't mean can't be a center for prairie diversity.